Okay, so this is the second video in our damp and mold masterclass. Today I want to talk about mold growth, okay, and basically cover something that's really very common that we see in our surveys. Every time pretty much we go into a property, we see this sort of misunderstanding of what causes mold growth, why it happens. So I just wanted to make this short video to sort of help in that understanding. Okay, so the first thing to say then is that every single indoor environment in the country, okay, there are millions of mold spores on every surface, everywhere. This is completely normal, okay, it's a matter of fact, and it's totally normal. So even if you are cleaning your surfaces all the time, there's still going to be millions of microscopic little mold spores on pretty much all of your surfaces. And when I say all of your surfaces, I mean all of your surfaces, okay? Walls, windows, ceilings, floors, your clothes, your hair, you name it. These spores, these microscopic little mold spores are absolutely everywhere, okay? So that's the first fact to always bear in mind, okay? So you then may ask, okay, so why do you see mold growth in one place and not another? Well, this is all down to do with the humidity, the indoor relative humidity conditions, which are different in certain parts of the room depending on the moisture content of the air and the temperature. Without going into any great detail, but basically the primary cause is the relative humidity swings. Okay, in this country, indoor relative humidity is always higher in winter than it is in summer because of the change in the air temperature. Higher air temperatures equal lower relative humidity and vice versa. Okay, so you typically see mold growth around on the colder surfaces in indoor environments, so around windows, ceiling corners, on external walls, this sort of thing. All right, and it's inevitable. Another way of thinking about this is that as the relative humidity of the air changes, as the indoor air passes over various surfaces, the colder it is, the higher the swing. And mold growth requires a minimum amount of relative humidity in the air to feed the mold spores at that location. So if you can imagine, the relative humidity is continuously changing according to temperature, and as it rises above that certain threshold, it's like watering plant seed in those places. And this is a really good analogy, in my opinion, my experience, because if you went down to the shopping centre, sorry, the gardening centre right now, bought a packet of plant seed and brought it back and opened it up and sprinkled a load of seeds over a table, and then if you came back a week later, those seeds are still going to be sat there. They're not going to have sort of sprouted roots and started growing. And that's because the environmental conditions around the seeds aren't supportive of their growth. Well, this is exactly the same thing that goes on at the microscopic level with mold spores. So going back to what I said at the beginning, there are mold spores on every surface everywhere, but they'll only start to grow if the conditions around them are suitable. Okay, and those mold growth conditions are met at certain times of the year in certain places according to the relative humidity condition. Okay, and this is the main message I wanted to get across. So if you look around yourself, look around the room you're in right now, there are millions of mold spores on every surface in this room. But you're not actually seeing mold growth for most of the year. In fact, you probably don't see mold growth in most of the surfaces the whole time. And this is because the relative humidity of the air at these locations never gets high enough to support the mold growth of the spores that are in those locations. Okay, and that's the reality of it. I see a lot of my customers and our customers talking to us about mold growing through. I've painted the surface, it's come through. Well, that's not true at all. Mold does not penetrate through paintwork or anything else. Okay, what happens when you paint a surface? It's only a matter of time before new mold spores land on the newly painted surface. Okay, and so therefore, if the mold growth conditions within the space are still supporting mold growth, then the mold will start to develop into the black mold that you can ultimately see. And this, by the way, is the reason why anti-mold paints don't work, because the anti-mold paint contains an agent. I hear a lot of products that say they work for months and even years. Well, that's rubbish. In my experience, you're lucky to get 30 days from an anti-mold paint, and then after that, it's the agent has worn off. So it depends on the time of year that you apply it. Because if you apply an anti-mold paint in March, you won't start seeing the mold growth until the following September, when the relative humidity conditions are supporting mold growth following the summer. So this is the key message we wanted to get across. Anti-mold paints, cleaning mold away from surfaces. These sorts of treatments are treating the symptom of the problem. The problem itself is the relative humidity condition. Okay, so they're not permanent. They're not going to prevent future mold growth. And this is a very important point to remember. So we see a lot of mold wash treatments. We see a lot of anti-mold paint treatments being proposed by people who don't have much experience in this industry, sold as permanent solutions. It's rubbish. Okay, it's not true. Okay, and any money spent on that is basically wasted, because you have to repeat the treatment later. It's much, much more cost effective and sensible to look for a permanent treatment that addresses the root cause of the problem. Okay, and obviously therefore it requires an understanding of that root cause and exactly how it's applied. Okay, so we'll get more into that in future videos, but hopefully that's been useful. Anyone has any questions of me, let me know. We're not here to educate, like I said, but happy to talk about this subject if anyone wants to ask me anything about it. I look forward to talking to you in the next video.